This is the Nomad Futurist podcast, a podcast about the evolution of technology, society, and transformation. Connect with us, share your thoughts with us at nomadfuturist.com. Let's get this started. Here are Phil and Nabeel.
Hello. Welcome to Nomad Futurist. This is your co-host, Nabeel Mahmood from Kailua Kona, Hawaii.
This is your co-host, Phillip Koblence from Montclair, New Jersey.
And this is John Bonczek from Wayne, New Jersey.
Hey, John, thank you very much for taking the time to join us today. Well, let's get started with where the heck is Wayne, New Jersey?
Wayne, New Jersey. It's the northern part of Wayne, New Jersey. So it's part of Passaic County, but it does border on Morris and Bergen County as well. So
does that help you in Hawaii?
I have no idea. No,
that answered the question.
Exactly.
Like everything else in New Jersey, it's 20 minutes. It's like 20 minutes from Montclair.
yeah, and the biggest help might be it's basically due west of New York City.
All right. Well, again, 20 minutes. Well, thank you again for taking the time to join us today. Could you share at a high level with our audience, what do you do?
Sure. So I currently work for a company called 1547 Critical Systems Realty. We are owners and operators of data centers across North America. And my role within this company is, well, my title is Chief Revenue Officer. So what that really means is I am responsible for the sales, marketing, and business development efforts. So I run the teams of people that go out and seek new business, manage our customer engagement relationships, and market to the outside world. We tend to wear a lot of hats in our company. We're a relatively small group of people doing big things. So at times it will extend beyond that, but that is the general gist of it. The outward facing portion of the company that works directly with our customers.
And you've been in the data center space pretty much sounds like your entire career. How did you get started?
Close to it. I got into co-location and data center space in 2003. Prior to that, I was always in telecom, so very industry adjacent, right? We still go to trade shows today that are called telecommunications shows that tend to be taken over somewhat by data center. But it started through relationships, really, is what it is. I started my career at AT&T, one of the big carriers, obviously, and I was in a sales position there. And I decided to leave to chase some more exciting stuff with smaller companies and worked for a number of CLECs in between there, and then starting with Telex. And I was introduced by Telex from a good friend of mine who had just recently started there. Our careers had crossed prior to Telex, but talking good friend prior to being in the professional working world, going back to the high school days. He had started as a position of running operations for Telex. And this was just after 9/11. So there was a lot of displacement in the industry. And I was actually doing some consulting work for Verizon, doing some post 9/11 disaster recovery, not sales, but sort of like a customer facing position, working on cutovers from the portions of their network that were destroyed in 9/11 that needed to be cut over to do systems. So working with the engineering teams in Verizon, and I would go out and visit with marquee customers who needed to sustain outages in order to be recut over. Going off on a little bit of a tangent, but that's where I was when my buddy called me and said, hey, he's working with this company, Telex, who primarily operated out of 60 Hudson Street at the time. And I thought they were onto something really interesting. And they were just about to start a sales team and thought I should come over and talk to those folks. And he introduced me to, well, interestingly, this will show the power of relationships and how this industry is kind of small, even though it's big at the same time. One of the co-founders of Telex, Todd Raymond, who happens to be my current CEO, who's bugging me this morning about some deals that we're trying to close. I met Todd and a number of other folks at Telex and came on board as the first person in a sales role hire at the company, and then evolved that role into building a sales engineering, and working more with the marketing team. And then that evolved from there. So that was 2003, where I got my first introduction to co-location and data centers.
Oh, just like yesterday.
Yeah. You know what? What's amazing about it is it's the same people. You're working with exactly the same people, right? So it is like yesterday.
It is so many of the same people, and I'm sure we'll get into it. And we could talk about the people that I worked with there and that were customers or just competitors, partners of, that we still work with and see. In fact, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Angel Wish, the wiffle ball tournament that they do in Hoboken, and I'm participating in that this year. And I was just reminiscing in photos going back to 2007, 8, through like 2015, and looking at those photos. It's the same people. year over year.
You got to get me in there. I love football.
So you should participate. Absolutely.
We should turn this podcast into me getting into the Angels Wiffle Ball tournament in Hoboken, New Jersey, which I think all of our listeners should come out and see because it'll be the Phillip Koblence Wiffle Ball debut.
They should. And certainly we need youth in that event because
Phil doesn't qualify for youth anymore.
I have the same haircut I was born with. So I think I do.
I think if I try to swing a wiffle ball bat as hard as I used to, I will end up in what's the closest hospital to Sinatra Park in Hoboken? That's where I'll be that evening.
Yeah, I'm sure we could find one. So I guess here's an aside. Let's go off on this tangent. When you were growing up, were you like, I want to be in telecom sales? That's really what I want to do. Is that what the goal is? So what were your hopes and dreams? What were you like as a kid? Who was John Bonczek as a kid?
I'd be lying to you if I told you that I had some goal of being a doctor or a lawyer. There's probably more of like, it'd be really cool to be a fireman or a policeman. And there was probably some point, maybe during high school, early college, when I realized as much as I respect and no slight to them, I was like, they don't make enough money and they put their lives in danger every day. Probably not for me. Not that I was a greedy person or looking to make a fortune.
So if they got paid more, you'd be a firefighter.
Still probably not.
It was the money.
It's not like I had set out to be in this industry. Although when I was in high school, I did start working summer jobs for 9X Bell Atlantic. Said the same company, but the name evolved over. My father was in telecom, and he said you should go out and start working in the summers.
What type of telecom was he in? What did telecom mean back then?
So it meant something very different. But in his type of telecom was a very different type of telecom. It was this thing called pubcom, which meant public communications, which we're all old enough to have pumped coins into a payphone. That was the majority of my dad's career, was working in public communications. And he was a director level operations analysis person who ran the public telephones in New York City. And I ended up working summers somewhere in that organization. I say somewhere. I didn't work directly with my dad.
You're collecting the quarters from the payphones.
Thank God I didn't have to do any of the outside work. I was always at a desk. And believe it or not, started doing that around the age of 14, going into the city and sitting at a desk and working in an analysis department for the pubcom for the New York City Public Communications Division of Bell Atlantic, which was very interesting, sort of. I would run reports every day at first.
Very interesting to a 14-year-old. I have an 11-year-old who can't sit still for 30 seconds.
It was crazy to think back how early I would get into the city and work.
Did they know how old you were?
Yeah, I was just old enough to get working papers and be allowed to have a job. And I actually worked summers doing this through the first couple of years of college. So I would go in, and it was fun. I had to watch how this job evolved, because my responsibility was really to generate reports that would go out to all of the division heads for each portion of New York City who were responsible for a certain set of payphone. And they used me to go in and get to the desk by 7 a.m. so I could pump some codes into a dumb terminal that would request data from a mainframe that would pump out a couple of hours later on a dot matrix printer that I would then use to pump into Lotus 123, and it would generate a report that showed how many troubles there were by each area of New York City on a per thousand payphone basis, and the troubles of different types. So it was called a report rate. The report rate was the big number on the bottom line. You know, how long a payphone was out of service for, under 24 hours, over 24 hours.
So it was really more of like an error report that you were looking at or generating.
Yeah. Mean time to repair reports. There's some really interesting things happening in the pubcom space, where there was one of the error codes was an off hook for X number of times. So if the phone was off hook for a number of hours, it tended to be that it was being used by drug dealers, because they had a way to keep the phone off hook and stay connected with Colombia or wherever they were communicating with. So reports would go out to the police. So they would then monitor those payphones. The most interesting report I had to run, and it was only during the summers, was the cherry bomb report. You'd be amazed to see how many payphones were blown up by fireworks in the summer.
Wow.
I can't even imagine how many people that are listening to this even know what hook means, like on the hook and off the hook. Like there was a time where you had to take the handset of a phone and put it on this thing where there was a little flap that was like made the and not connected.
I remember when I started my career in sales and I was out in the field. A lot of people probably don't even know what that means, because you're mostly at your desk. But when we were out in the field, out visiting customers, and you would have to go pick up your voicemail, I'd be down in a subway station, putting a phone to my ear and close to my mouth that hundreds of people
Right.
And then, well, didn't have to pump quarters into it because I had an 800 number to call our Onyx system to pick up my voicemail. This is all very foreign stuff to people who hopefully are listening to this.
And that's
Isn't it
how
amazing?
That's how
Isn't it
JP got
amazing
gangrene.
how quickly times have changed? It's not that long ago. It's like what,
I-
under 30 years.
Yeah, 1997 is when I was still working for AT&T, selling out in the field, visiting customers. I did actually have a cell phone, but I wouldn't dare use it to call audits because I was still paying by the minute. So it's still
Let's Saved by the Bell, Zach Morris, giant cell phone.
pull out the antenna.
With the antenna, with the damn antenna. So was your mom also in telecom? Was this like a telecom
No.
family?
No, my mom was primarily a stay-at-home, but she did work in once we were a little bit older, she worked in banks for a number of years, mostly as a bank teller, or I guess she got into other things like loans and such. But she worked at community banks in Staten Island.
Brothers and
Wonderful.
sisters, who are they? Bonczeks. How many?
Yeah, there's 2 siblings, one older sister, one younger sister, and you know what that makes? The middle boy, right?
No, there's no doubt. And meat that sister sandwich. My God.
Yeah, but they're great people, still very close with the family.
Wonderful. Are they still in the sector? Were they in the sector ever?
No, well, believe it or not, my older sister did actually work a lot of those summers in a very nearby department for, let's call it the phone company, because the name changed so many times. But she ended up getting into teaching. So she actually teaches high school at my former high school. And my younger sister works for PwC. She was an accountant for a while. Now she's in human resources. Totally separate, different places. Yeah.
So as you went through schooling, you got your first flavor of the telco space. Was that something that kept on the radar? Was that something that you were pursuing aggressively?
I can't say I was pursuing it aggressively. I was more opportunistic, and I studied business. So I didn't expect I would be somebody who was going to work with my hands, or
Clearly, the firefighters didn't make enough, so it had to be.
Yeah. I shouldn't say that. I don't like myself sound like a greedy person. I'm not. No. I think I was any normal kid who was thinking about all the stuff that you saw out there as jobs, firemen, policemen, things like that. But no, I just figured myself at some point to be in business in some way, shape, or form, which is what I studied. I studied business management in college. And I did have other family members and friends that were working in telecom. We had a lot of our extended family worked in telecom. And I got some introductions to some folks at AT&T through a family member, and that evolved into pursuing an opportunity to work in sales in their middle markets division. Yeah, and interestingly, my first seat at a desk for what I'll call a real job, not at the summer jobs, was at 32 Avenue of the Americas on the 16th floor there, which that building has been part of my life since in different capacities, and maybe again at some point.
Just under the Rudens. Or the Bonczeks.
Yeah.
The Bonczeks have been there longer than the Rudens. It seems to me that you were in telecom. I think you're one of the few people that we can consider to be like a second generation telecom person, which is interesting. But it seems like you were there, like you entered telecom really at the time that the commercialized internet started to become a thing. Like in 1997, when you were going into that desk as a 14-year-old, that's when AOL was sending those CDs around and Prodigy was doing their thing and CompuServe was a thing, right? And what was that like? What was it like to see really from the desk, people using the phone primarily as like a voice communication thing and that transition to data?
Well, it was really interesting, like especially having, and not that it's necessarily telecom industry related, the tools that I used to do my job evolved directly related to what we're talking about, what we did, directly related to telecom and data center. So when I tell you that the first summer I ever worked doing that job, when I would go in and sit at, imagine a monochrome black dumb terminal that sat on the desk with a heavy hard keyboard and literally just punching in codes that if I had a comma or a semicolon wrong, it wouldn't spit out the right report. And I might not know I made a mistake for a couple hours because it was sending that request out to a mainframe. And the reason I had to get in so early because that mainframe would get bogged up. And if I didn't get those requests in before like 7:30 in the morning, I wouldn't get them until 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Instead, I was getting them before 9 so then I can generate other reports. I literally had to rip the paper off the printer, and you had to make sure that the printer was set to work too, right? Because if the printer wasn't set to work, that stuff wouldn't print up. And if it got jammed, then you had to go request the report again because the mainframe didn't know that it spat the report out to a printer that got jammed. It would just be all messed up. You'd have to go do it over again. And then I would pump those reports into a desktop computer, not the dumb terminal, but the desktop computer. And did you guys ever use Lotus 123? It was a spreadsheet before Excel. And then over time got actually evolved into using Harvard graphics to create pie charts and line graphs and stuff to show different reports. But entering that information, taking it off a piece of paper, putting it back into a computer to then print out a report. And the way I distributed them to all the regional managers was some of them sat in an adjacent office and I would go and physically hand them report. Others, I faxed them. So I would fax people like an upstate New York report. It was crazy. And that evolved into the last summer I did that same job. I was using a PC to access a database that would do everything right there in front of me. And of course, that data was sitting on another server somewhere that you were still accessing. But you cut like 4 steps out of the process. And then I was able to email them to people as well. So
I have to imagine like the people that worked there also. I mean, you were a young kid, right? So you're the one that's embracing technology and kind of absorbing it in real time. And I have to imagine there were people that felt like, no, why am I using this fax machine? I used to walk this over to the thing. What is this weird thermal paper?
Yeah, when I was using like Lotus 123 and Harvard graphics and doing charts and graphs, they thought I was some kind of wizard because I was working. I actually worked with a couple of really great guys who were retired and came back to do some after retirement work. That's the way the phone company worked back then. You would take an early package and then they would hire you back. So you're kind of a full-time employee, but already collecting retirement. And they were great guys. They were probably like my age now. And I was working with them then, and they just thought I was, again, like some kind of wizard who was able to do this stuff. But what was funny was I can use the technology to generate the reports. They understood the report and they would teach me what the reports meant in turn. So I learned a bit about the industry from them and I taught them a bit about how to use the computer.
Well, isn't it amazing? I mean, dot matrix printers to thermal printouts on fax machines to email, how quickly that has changed. And I got to give AOL the credit, right? You've got mail. How was the living through that experience in the telco world?
I guess when I started my first what I call real job at AT&T, using email was still brand new as the form of communication. It wasn't even the primary form of communication. You were still picking up the phone to call your customers. And then you would send them information over email, but it wasn't your primary way of getting in touch with them. And so that evolution to where we are today, where now we have too many forms of communication, like email folks as a primary form and text them in emergencies or send them a Teams now for a general inquiry. It's crazy how it's evolved. And part of it I don't like, at least in a way, this kind of communication that we're doing right here allows us to come back a little bit to real human communication. Yeah, because now, I don't know, we don't want to thank COVID for much, but that's kind of driven us to be able to see each other's faces on screens as opposed to if we were doing a conference call before. It's amazing how this has become the norm.
If that really is you could be an AI bot.
It might not be me. It might be AI.
You do have like a max headroom quality. Your hair kind of has a max headroom quality to it right now, which I'm sure none of the kids actually know what I'm talking about. There was a Pepsi commercial with this guy that was trapped in a box.
And he was AI. Max.
And he was the original AI. And you're going to see this on video. He had John Bonczek's haircut. It's exactly the same.
Pretty amazing. I wasn't thinking that, but you're close to right on that.
I'm very sensitive to the way people's hair looks because it's been decades.
Got a couple of guys on here with it that are not going bald, my friend.
Thank you. I appreciate you pointing that out so explicitly.
I couldn't pull it.
Looks good. Everybody says that. Yeah, I couldn't pull that off. Yeah, it's because your head is so round. Yes, that's exactly what I was thinking.
But it was amazing because I used AOL online at home, right? That was that wasn't the way to communicate with friends and family, but it became that over time.
But it's one of the things that I think, like you and I, we've talked about this in the past. We are relationship people. Like we have to, like the only way we can get from point A to point B in our careers is to have like personal relationships with the people that we work with. And that's how everything happens. And yes, we use a distribution medium for communication with SMS or Slack or Teams or email or what have you. Email being the snail mail of this generation's like, oh my God, you sent an email? I thought you wanted to let me know something. But there has been something significantly lost about how teenagers communicate with one another and kids communicate with one another. And you almost think that there should be a curriculum in schools about how to interact.
Yeah, I completely agree because there is no substitute for in-person and real live communication. I was just joking with somebody the other day about playing golf, not playing enough golf because we don't do, I'm not saying it's because it's a straight boondoggle, but we don't do enough of things like play golf anymore, just to grab a customer and go out and play golf, grab a partner, go out and play golf. I remember back from my early days at AT&T when I did do stuff like that occasionally. We did have outings, and you never learned more about a person than spending 4 or 5 hours with them, playing a very humbling game on a course, maybe having a couple of cocktails. You're trapped in, you learn something. And then I developed friendships in places like that, at events like that, dinners, lunches, social, just getting out and meeting them at their office and just in person shaking hands. There is absolutely no substance. You think about, we were just at ITW, right? And I got FaceTime with some folks that I communicate with all the time via email, every once in a while a phone call. And it's amazing how sitting across from them, I share information that I know I sent them, but they're getting hundreds of those, thousands of those. And it doesn't resonate the same as when you're sitting there. Now you got the association. Oh, you have that there? Shoot, I might need that. It's a whole different meeting. It resonates completely differently when you're doing it in person across and staring at that person live than it does even here. We're focused here right now. I turn stuff off, right? We're talking to each other, but we all know how it goes when you're on a conference call, when you're perhaps going to have limited participation in that call. We're all off doing other things, focusing on the 3 other forms of communication that we have in front of us, or trying to catch up on that busy work. Can't do that when you're in person with somebody.
I don't know. My kids are pretty good at staring at the phone while I'm trying to talk to them.
That's exactly why your kids need the class in school, right? They don't teach them how to adult and how to really, you can't have
There was a Seinfeld skit about would it have been okay 10 years ago for someone to speak to you and then you just open up a magazine and start reading it in front of them while you're talking to them. And that's basically what people are doing, is they're doing this while trying to talk to you. It's just unbelievable. It's look, I catch myself doing it also, right? That's the modern way. But I think the first thing we have to, what is the first step in solving a problem is to admit we have a problem. I think we have a problem.
Yeah. And I think every generation there's always problems, right? And ours is no exception. And I just think the problems with the way we communicate, they've accelerated. You talked earlier about how fast things have advanced. Up until the late 90s, early 2000s, you were either in person or on the phone with somebody. Those are the only ways you communicated with people. I remember my dad going on business trips for PubCom. He had to travel. And once he was on the road, he was on the road. People at the office weren't communicating with him. If there was an emergency, there was a message for him at the desk of the hotel that he was staying at. You didn't go back to your hotel room and get online. And
you weren't mapping out the payphones. Oh, I'll beat you this pay. According to my son, this is the one that the drug dealers use. So I'm going to meet you there.
So, John, do you think we are going to go back to those times again, knowing that history repeats itself and the human element, the human interaction is an important piece of what you do in your sales engagement? With all the advent of technology and everything being at your fingertips, and the fact that we're running into this human interaction or the challenge of not being there, not being present in conversations, do you believe that we're going to go back in time and emphasize on those human engagements?
I don't think we'll go back completely, but I think there has to be a bit of a reset to get us back. And I don't think necessarily folks like us on here need it, because we already know and understand the value of, although the distractions do limit how often we do get out and see each other in person. But I think about it for myself. I'm sitting at home right now. I know you guys are sitting in your futuristic studios right now, which I would suspect are in your homes, right? I've been thinking a lot lately about the value of going into the office. And it wasn't that long ago where it was very normal to go into the office every day, into our office every day. Now, I will caveat this with, I would never look forward to commuting from North Jersey into downtown Manhattan again, because driving to a bus and getting on a bus to take you to Midtown and getting on another train to get to the office and then doing that in reverse every day does not sound like something I ever want to do.
I don't know if Todd is listening to this, but what I'm hearing is 1547 office opening in Wayne, New Jersey, coming in 2025.
It would be brilliant. I do have, it's my actual office is in Orangeburg, in our data center. Now, I would be there every day if there was a group of people that I needed to interact with every day. But usually when I go there, I shut my door and I do this all day from the desk, and then I leave and come home. So I'm like, why did I spend, an hour and a half or whatever it is total? But I do think of the days when you had a main office back in the Telex station. Our main office was downtown Manhattan, either 1 State or 17 State Street. And I would go there every day. If you were working, you were expected to be there, right? And I didn't think anything of it. I had a team. My team needed to be there. I think today about all of the scheduled calls or Teams meetings or Zoom meetings that we have, that back then would have been 5 minutes. Somebody just needed to pop into my office, or I needed to pop into theirs and just solve something and be done. You didn't have, what are we talking about? 5, 8 years ago? I didn't have a day that was back to back to back meetings on, Zoom, Teams, whatever meetings. You had a few. Perhaps you had one day where you focused on being out in the field or doing tours of data centers, which I would try to focus on 1 or 2 days of the week. And then the other days you're in the office getting stuff done, and you were able to grab people that you needed as you needed to and talk to them live about what you needed to talk to them about, solving a problem, strategizing on an account, whatever it was. It was more effective and more productive because maybe you took 5 or 10, and today I got to block 30 minutes on the calendar in order to do that. I'm not saying I don't use that other time for other things, but it just seems silly what we used to be able to do in the office productively together.
And again, like everything else is on paper. Yes, you're meeting with them and accomplishing a task or discussing something, but you're not learning who they are. You're not learning who they are on a Teams call or on a scheduled meeting that is like it has 15 minutes or 30 minutes or 20 minutes allocated before they have to get to the next one. Like nobody knows what a water cooler moment is anymore. I could not have predicted that water cooler would be something that nobody even knows, like gathering around the water cooler. It's like something that is like dying in sitcom land, right?
That's so Mad Men. That's so
Right.
Mad Men.
Can't gather around, like, what's the gossip? What's the office gossip? What are you going to set up a Zoom call to talk about, like who smells?
Or just do a Teams. Exactly. Just do a Teams message with a bunch of emojis.
Right.
I have another example. This is kind of general, but I've seen it here in this lifetime at 1547. We're a company of about 100 people, let's call it. And you take the core leaders, people who manage people in the company and our different department heads, maybe there's 20 some odd of us, right? And naturally between organizations, there's always some healthy tension. I worked with one of my best friends who was in operations at Telex for a number of years, and I was in sales, and we always had healthy tension in the office. We could always laugh it off and have a drink after work, and everything was fine. We were great friends. But if that healthy tension comes without the balance, the tension grows, right? And the way we resolve tension in these parts is every once in a while, every several months, we have to get together and do some form of team building thing, even if it's just getting together for dinner, going out to Top Golf. We did axe throwing last year, and we always leave those things with such a kumbaya feeling, and in a very good way, where there's air cleared and people get at each other more. There's no tone in emails. There is when you're joking with somebody in person. You might have taken something the wrong way when you're using a certain form of communication. So rather than having to sugarcoat every email, if you're talking to somebody live, they can tell if you're being sarcastic or not. But point being, we always come away from those in-person gatherings where we have a lot of fun as a group and we bond, and that lasts for a week or so. It's off again, and then tension starts to build. And some people that I work with, I don't see for months. I don't physically see for months. And I think we need to change that, because it's very difficult to manage a healthy organization and cut through tension. And what does tension do? Just like in anything, in sports, tension, in a golf swing, tension. It prevents you from succeeding. It keeps you from getting things done. You don't want tension in anything that's unhealthy. And the only way to cut through that in an organization is to do it in person. Even seeing somebody's face or a Teams or Zoom, it doesn't do it. It is a good substitute for.
It's better than getting on a Zoom call without the cameras on, which I
That
won't
drives
allow.
me up
I
a
won't allow it.
And that I always have my camera on. If I don't have my camera on, something's going on in the background that I'm trying to keep people from being distracted or whatever, but I usually have it on.
So out there, so all you kids out there, when you get on Zoom calls, turn on your damn camera.
Turn on your camera.
If
Get good. If you don't have it on, you're being judged.
Right.
Exactly.
I'm not wearing pants. It's fine.
Yeah.
It's
Doesn't
fine.
matter if you don't have pants on.
It doesn't matter
Don't
if you
get
don't
on
have
it.
Just keep it waist high. John, so you started your career with error reporting, with data mining, right? When that thing actually did not really have a buzzword per se. How did you move from that to getting involved in sales, knowing might as well that you got your degree in business administration? So could you share at a very high level what that journey was?
It was really kind of simple. With my education and a little bit of background I had in industry, I had an uncle of mine who worked in a branch of AT&T, who was friendly with the folks in the other branch and made some introductions. And getting to start a career in sales, you don't necessarily need experience in sales. You might not get that senior level position and all of the accounts day one, but basically got an entry level sales job at AT&T through some introductions and family members. And look, being able to check certain boxes, right? Check the education box and everything looked good there. And having some experience in telecom was a plus, but it wasn't necessary, right? So really getting into this space was just it was sort of a decision, right? I decided, you know what, I will pursue this path. I will go back to saying there was some thought aside from just not wanting to be a police officer or fireman, but business technology route was always something interesting to me, you know, especially because I always thought it was something that we were always going to need and it was always going to grow. Telecom being what I thought was that technology at the time, which it still kind of is, right? That evolved into what I didn't even know was required in the background, things like carrier hotels and data centers. And I still love it for those same reasons. And I think when we did that meeting with the college students not long ago, the message I try to get across is there is no world that I could predict, and I think any of us could predict, that doesn't see the need for what we do or the evolution of what we do continuing to grow and expand and evolve. It's always going to be necessary. It's necessary for what we're doing right now, the way we're looking at each other and communicating. And it's amazing how good this communication is, right? There's no lag. I could see you guys crystal clear on my screen. That doesn't happen. It's not possible without what we do. And trying to get that message to resonate, right? We hold these things in our hands all the time. My phone, all right? And to just let these young folks know that everything that they're doing, how many times a day they're engaging data center across connect, multiple data centers, multiple interconnection points across a network every single day when they pick up their devices. When they
That's thousands of times, depending on how active they are on platforms, and knowing the fact that everyone's so connected that the example that Phil gave earlier, that you probably are multitasking, looking at your phone and having a conversation. Everyone's connected several times a day. Knowing what you know today, and I've gone through the cycle of this continuous change, couple of questions. What would you do differently? And or what would your career path would be, knowing what you know today as to how the next 20, 30 years are going to look for the next generation?
Yeah.
And second part of that question is, in the last 3 decades that we have briefly touched here, from public communications to telecommunications to data centers and everything connected, how do you stay up to date? And what would you tell the young generation to look into and follow?
So the old phrase hindsight's 2020, right? Looking back, there's certainly some things I would do a little different. Might have focused on and trying to get into the data center space earlier. Maybe even once I did get into that space, I would have been more bold about encouraging our financial backing to go all in on some other spaces that maybe we missed out on, or growing to the point that we're very successful. In my previous life, very successful in selling a company for a couple $2 billion, and can't really have regrets there. But the hindsight tells you could have done some things a little bit different, could have got out ahead of a couple things. If you could go back before the owners of buildings like 60 Hudson Street and 32A, they knew what they had buying those buildings. And then we own some properties today. And this is where I'm not meaning to talk specifically about 1547, but I love what we do in the sense that it's not necessarily just data center, right? It's the interconnection hubs. There's data center space within our buildings. We have some that are straight data center, but the core to our thesis these days is the carrier hotel. And we acquired these buildings that are just a beautiful disaster of fiber cables and a mess of interconnection and the wild, wild west folks running stuff to each other. I'd love to go back and organize those buildings from the beginning and be a part of their evolution more so and have them in a better state than they are now, because I know how important they are today and how much more important they will become.
Knowing, of course, if they were organized that way, you probably wouldn't have the opportunity to own them. Sorry, go ahead.
But I'm saying I'd own them from back then.
You would own them and never sold them to the future John Bonczek. We're gonna there's got to be a movie that we can create about this, of like Back to the Future, where we see what would have happened if John Bonczek had bought 60 Hudson Street, and if Telex ever would have even existed, if you had known.
Yeah, and it's true. Again, hindsight, I probably wouldn't have done any of that, and I would have just gone back and bought a bunch of stocks that you knew were going to blow up, and you'd never hear from me. But
would have gone back in 2007, bought a bunch of Bitcoin, and been done with it.
Oh my God, yeah. But I think, like, I talk to my kids too about, like, let's just say, if I'm not struggling or anything, but if the coffers were so full, there's no question I could just retire and go live the life I want to live. I think I still have to work. I think my job's not done. All right. And I still like what we do, and I'd still keep doing it. And Nabeel, you asked about how do you continue to learn. That's a beautiful thing about our industry and industries in general. There's access to so much information out there. You don't have to search too hard to go find all the different periodicals out there about what's happening in communication, what's happening in AI. You could use AI to learn about AI. You can go in there and just start asking questions, poking and prodding.
But then AI is only telling you what it wants you to know.
Perhaps. And again, maybe I am AI and I didn't actually dial into this.
Oh my God, you dialed in. Look at this.
I know.
That's a human. That's a human. AI would have never said that.
Yeah, that's who dialed anymore.
Right. Dial.
We got you on the hook there, John. Right. Oh, wait, that was another pun.
You got
Are your kids going to be generation 3 in the telecom space?
I don't think so, but you never know. One of them is studying kinesiology with the intentions of being an occupational therapist. It's funny, I have a 20-year-old now, so I only have one teen now and one adult 20-year-old. She just celebrated her birthday this weekend, and she has other friends who are studying similar things, and there's some talk about them in the future opening up their own practice and having a occupational therapist, a physical therapist, a speech therapist, and which is great. And I love what she's studying. And in particular, what I love about what she's studying is related to how I think about AI. What is AI going to replace? What functionality is going to start to be diminished until they have actual robots who can physically work with humans, and which maybe to some extent they do. I think there's still a good future in those job functions. I think that my younger daughter probably has a better chance of ending up in this industry because she's looking to study marketing and PR. So maybe Alyssa Miller will be getting that call in a couple of years.
There's a plug.
I got an intern for you.
Plug. Alyssa, there's a Bonczek.
Exactly.
There's a Bonczek coming your way.
Yeah.
We know
She'll be
there's a
coming
bunch
through
of
the Nomad Futurist Academy program,
Right.
scholarship
Yeah.
internship program. Wonderful.
Which
John-
I also think is great too, because Alyssa is wonderful, and not to just give props to Alyssa, but she embraces young people in college and out of school, just coming in to learn the industry, and appreciates when they grow and learn and move on and maybe get bigger positions. So it's having access to people like that and organizations like that who are open to hiring folks without much experience and bringing them into this industry, I think is a great catalyst for our growth.
If for no other reason, so that we have some young blood coming into this wiffle ball tournament where I become the young one, which does not speak well.
I'm actually considering if I could get my daughter, give me 5 students from the baseball team, and I'll pay them for the day. Come and we'll watch.
Yeah.
Crush the old ones.
Yeah,
Crush the old
exactly.
ones. John, based on your experiences and everything that you've done and being really vested in the telecommunication, the data center space, what do you foresee the next 5 to 10 years to be like for us?
Well, I think we can predict some exponential growth in the data center space. Now, I say that like I do with most things, with a caveat, right? The one fear that I have is a little bit of a bubble, and not so much a bubble where it's going to completely burst and implode our industry, but one where it's the AI driver going out and consuming and building the now gigawatt campuses. And I don't know that there's enough analytics out there to accurately show, and this things get out of my technical depth, right? But it just seems like there's so much being built, and it's also forcing, there's still traditional enterprise data center space requirements, traditional hyperscale, funny to say traditional hyperscale requirements, Because years ago, we were talking about, not many years ago, just a few, hyperscale growing unbelievably, and your financial enterprise data centers diminishing a bit, or not diminishing, but not expanding at the same pace, not nearly.
Now 100 megawatts is quaint.
I know. So we have a 24 megawatt data center in Orangeburg, and we're going to be doing a 30 megawatt expansion. And at one point, that would be a very exciting thing to put out in the news. And we still will do a press release on it. But not to downplay, it's going to be tremendously important for the tenants, that the type of tenants that we have there, more of an edge data center. And there's trading applications, financial applications happening in that building. And it's still required, but it's, 30 megawatts.
Big deal.
Yeah, that's one cabinet.
Yeah. Okay. So if we're planning another property that has the potential, we could build 2 million square feet of data center on this property. We were approved for 2 million square feet of building, and right now has 450 megawatts. And one of the folks that we're talking to, who is expecting to be able to do up to 200 kW per cabinet, you only need like 1/4 of one of the buildings that we plan on building on that site. So Nabeel, this does lend to what you asked. We're going to see a lot of different types of build go on the data center side. And I don't think we've settled in on what the right technology is yet exactly for cooling in particular. Yeah, because the theoretical threshold for air cooling in a data center space is around 40 kW per cabinet, and nobody even comes close to that. I think most folks, once you get past 20, are looking at direct liquid cooling of some sort. Immersion has been discussed, but I think that's going to be skipped over, and nobody seems to be brave enough to go all in on immersion cooling.
Sounds like we have some friends of the podcast that would love to debate that point. But yes,
maybe I'll have to go listen. But yeah, maybe we'll see. I say that because I've talked to customers who are exploring doing immersion cooling with us, and then now we're talking to them more about direct liquid.
Because they don't want to put on a scuba outfit to reboot a server.
But like Michael Dell said, that was the best slimy technology ever deployed.
Interesting though, really, immersion is still using DLC, because you're still bringing the water or coolant that you're bringing to the cabinet is cooling the liquid that is the immersion liquid that's cooling. So there's a lot of similar technology. But what you're going to have to see, and what we're going to have to decide to do, is either just do all built to suit, or I know there are some folks out there who certainly announced speculatively building out direct liquid cooling solutions to handle high densities on a large scale, because that's what you're going to have to do if you're going to build that, or at least have in progress space that's going to be ready for the demand that needs it to move in. Yeah, because I'm also talking to, you see some of the traditional enterprise users of data center space now having to get years ahead of their data center requirements. They can't just call their broker and say, go find me 5 megawatts of move-in ready space in New York or Chicago. It doesn't exist anymore. They have to get out ahead of it and start doing RFIs and RFPs for a requirement that's 3 years out. So you're seeing a shift in how demand is addressed from the user side, and going out and trying to find it early on. You're going to see high percentage of occupancy in markets for large data center footprint. And then again, the fear is there a bubble there? Is there going to be an overabundance of available data center space if something does shift in all of the AI requirement that we're seeing?
This could not be near and dear to my heart, because I agree with, I don't call it a bubble because bubbles burst. I call it like beer foam. Like, it will eventually get absorbed. It'll eventually turn into beer, but it'll be fun to sit on the sidelines and watch all these gigawatt campuses being absorbed. But it's also, like, in my mind, the way I look at it is, when I started data centers, it was like these giant socket 370 processors, where it was like this Intel thing that you plugged into a slat, and like these giant servers were taking up what was a lot of power at the time. But then eventually it shifted towards, you could do the same thing in a smaller footprint, and it wasn't necessarily even more dense because the processors got more efficient. So they're basing a lot of these specs on what the GPU processors and the RDU processors look like today, without a recognition that we are at the beginning of this trajectory of AI, and inevitably they will get more energy efficient. And what will have required a 200, like what did Cyrus once say, 300 kW in a single rack, is going to inevitably shift back to a more realistic type of consumption of power model. But
which that's such an excellent point too, because that's got to be a different mentality for the data center owners and operators and the utility, right? You look at it, we are in a bit of a situation in some markets where there's not enough utility power. Well, the interesting thing is there's actually a lot of utility power out there. It's committed to data centers that are using 30, 40% of it. And now the shift being that the new ones being built and the technology that's being put in them being more efficient, meaning they're going to actually use it.
Right. We've got to bring our efficiency metrics as well as utilization metrics higher. Do you think that the market, it's the 5-year, 3 to 5 year term, we're going to see some sort of a market stabilization or the bubble that you guys are referring to? Are we 3 to 5 years out?
I think we have to. I think we will. Once the demand for the AI, and I'm talking about their demand for what they're putting out there, becomes more predictable. I predict a stabilization, not a fall off. But if we continue on the trajectory that we're on, I don't know how we're going to build it and where they're going to get the power, because it's, in a hockey stick right now.
I think inevitably the growth rate starts to level off, because at some point there's a finite amount of capacity until you get to these reactors and all that stuff, which, as we've discussed it ad nauseum, bureaucratically difficult to see how that happens quickly. But I think the one thing about our industry that always heartens me, that we try to tell all these schools that we get in front of, and we did it with John at Foothill when we had that experience, is that no matter how much of digital infrastructure is built, there is no doubt that it will be leveraged in some way, shape, or form by whether it's exactly how they envision it happening now. Or so I'm a huge fan of making sure that whatever you build, don't build an entire building that you plan to submerge, because you want to make sure that it has multiple use cases that all accomplish the same thing, which is to have things available online for processing, for applications, for storage, et cetera.
I couldn't agree more. And like I said, even if we hit that beer foam moment, it's going to be consumed.
It's already stolen my beer foam thing. You're going to use that. I get a nickel. I get a nickel for all these.
John, being a builder, owner, and operator, and we had a brief chat here regarding immersion cooling and technologies thereof. Quantum is right around the corner as well. What are you guys looking at, thinking about? Because that totally redefines how we will build, operate data centers of the future, considering that it's going to be at 459 degrees Kelvin versus fighting 55 to 75 degrees temperatures right now.
Yeah. I think there's still a lot to be determined on quantum. We were looking at an opportunity to potentially host some quantum at one point. And we were providing them with a certain amount of infrastructure, but they had to provide their own, because their cooling is a whole different technology. We're cooling their equipment. That's cooling their equipment, basically. And the fact that it's got to operate at that absolute zero and have zero vibration, is only limited places where it can go. But I think it's got to be, what I've read and what I see is they're still solving for error rates in order to have quantum compute be mainstream functional yet. But if it does become, and we're talking about compute capacity, that gives us the ability to do things that were not even possible before, let alone just multiplying our, your compute is now 100 times faster. I don't know what the actual numbers they say are, and the problems that would take 40 years to solve, what traditional supercomputers now get done in seconds or minutes with quantum. It's a whole different ballgame. So I can't say that I know how to ready ourselves for that, if that's where things are going.
Just watch the Marvel movies. That's the only way, right? That's where I've learned everything about quantum, is from Doctor Strange.
Very good. John, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. This has been great. Would you share your parting thoughts with our audience as to the future of the data centers, things that they should be considering, and how to engage and what to do? What's next?
Yeah, my parting thoughts are, in my involvement with you guys is because I love what you guys are doing, and in the need for us to continue to grow this industry. And it's not begging. I don't want to make it like we're begging folks to look at data centers and become a part of this industry. It's a huge opportunity. I think everything that we're talking about, and we can joke about what we don't know is going to be required and what the use case is going to be for the next technology, because no matter what comes out in terms of your throughput on your phone and the capacity of servers and the throughput of network, we figure out ways to use it. We figure out how to have things like this real-time video conferencing capability that operates flawlessly, which wouldn't have been possible a few years ago. And whatever the latest and greatest is, AI is the biggest buzz. It's a tide that's raising all ships. And I can only see it continuing from the data center to the network technology and the physical fiber assets in the ground, and the carrier hotels are the hubs of interconnection. all of this stuff is going to continue to grow. And there's so many disciplines across it where we require great people to come in and help us run it, from even just on the business side of that. We need finance people, we need marketing people, we need sales people, and then we need folks who are technical and work with their hands as well. So I just think this industry is going to present more and more of a great opportunity for folks to come in and help us continue to grow it.
Well, we thank you for your support. We couldn't do it without you and your passion. And my God, you're perfect hair.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I guess we got to see you on the golf course next time.
Yes, we should.
No. Wiffle ball court. We're going to wiffle ball field court. Wiffle ball field.
Let's go.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, John. Greatly appreciate you joining us on the podcast today.
You got it. It's a pleasure. I'll talk to you guys soon.
This has been great. Nothing lasts forever. Markets will come back, currencies will rebound, businesses will go on, and we will all move on. That could happen next week, next month, or next year. At Nomad Futurist, we're confident that those who prepare rather than panic will come out of this stronger. Thank you for joining us. This has been brought to you by Nomad Futurist. Check us online at nomadfuturist.org. And thank you for listening and subscribing, as well as your continued support.